Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Hey, do not forget, July the 11th through the 13th, 2019, Ardmore, Oklahoma. Our theme is how to know we're not living in the last days. Well, hey, guess what, folks? If the Christian age has no end, as we were talking about yesterday, then we're not living in the last days. See, it's real simple. Okay, pardon me. As promised, I want to share with you just some, certainly not all, just some of the Old Testament passages that establish the fact that when Christ would establish his kingdom, that kingdom, his rule over that kingdom, his rule on his throne in that kingdom would never end. Now, I promise you that I will have a discussion of 1 Corinthians 15, 24 and following, where people always go and they say, well, you know, Preston, you talk about Christ ruling forever and his kingdom having no end. But at the time of the end, he hands over, he delivers the kingdom to the Father, and he stops ruling and reigning. That's a misunderstanding of 1 Corinthians chapter 15. But we'll get to that, all right? That, trying to appeal to that text in the light of all the passages that I'm going to share with you is actually pitting Scripture against Scripture. It's not conflating them. It's not harmonizing them. It's saying, well, yeah, you've got some verses that sound like he will never stop reigning, but I've got one that says he will stop reigning, so there, see, my verse trumps yours. No, that's not the way we do Scripture. We have to harmonize them. How do we harmonize passages that affirm, seemingly extremely clearly, that Jesus will rule without end, his kingdom has no end, with a verse that seemingly, according to some, according to many, he will lay aside his rule. He will surrender his rule. He will abdicate his rule and give the kingdom back to the Father. But is that really what that says? Well, anyway, Isaiah chapter 9. In Isaiah chapter 9, a marvelous passage and a marvelous prophecy of the coming of Jesus and the establishment of his kingdom. Isaiah 9, verse 6 and following, verse 7 specifically. Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder. His name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase, now watch, of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. Upon the throne of David, and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with just judgment and justice from that time forward. From what time forward? From the time he would sit on the throne of David. From the time he would take that throne, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. Now, here we have a prediction of the birth of the one born to the virgin, chapter 7, verse 14. He would sit on the throne of David. Now watch this. Of the increase of his government. Well, what is the increase of his government? That's evangelism. Well, if it's evangelism, that means that there's never a time, there's never an end of time, there is never a last day after which there's no evangelism. By the way, Isaiah 66 pretty well determines that and agrees with this. At the day of the Lord, in flaming fire against the enemies of God, by the way, in destruction of the city and the temple, Isaiah 66:4 and following. Those who would survive that day of the Lord would go to the nations who had never known the name of the Lord and bring them to Him. That's evangelism after the day of the Lord in flaming fire. Well, the day of the Lord of flaming fire is 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. But do you see the power of that? Evangelism after the day of the Lord in flaming fire. In other words, evangelism after the last day. Well, once again, if there is no end to the increase of His government, and somebody may jump up and say, well, you know, Don, there are actually some translations that say of the growth of His kingdom, or the growth of His kingdom shall be great, and of peace there will be no end. Well, there are a few translations, but that's the minority, by far, translation. All you have to do is go to BibleGateway.com, look up Isaiah chapter 9, verse 7, and you can look up every single English translation that they have listed, which is at the current rate over 50 translations. And you will find that by far the predominant translation is of the increase of His government and of peace, there will be no end. Now, that translation agrees perfectly with what I just shared with you in Isaiah 66. After the day of the Lord, there is evangelism. There is the going into the nations who had never known the Lord and bringing them to the Lord. Kind of destroys the Israel-only concept, doesn't it? Anyway, do you see the real incredible power of Isaiah chapter 9? When people say, well, you know, in Matthew chapter 24, the disciples were asking about the end of the current Christian age. Well, if they were asking about the end of the current Christian age, then they were asking about the, quote, last day. But wait a minute. The kingdom of Christ has no end. Now, I want you to notice something very quickly. Notice that it says, from that time forward, okay? From the time that He would take the throne of David, from that time onward, even forever. Now, it's important to note that in the Hebrew word olam, normally translated as forever, eternal, etc., does not within itself mean without end. But here's something you need to know. The words that are translated without end is not from olam. Okay? Totally different. So for someone to appeal, as they have done with me in formal public debate, to appeal to the word forever here and say, well, that's olam. Olam doesn't necessarily mean forever. It doesn't necessarily mean without end. No, that's an invalid application of the text. And by the way, here you have an affirmation that of the increase of His government there will be no end. So here, olam must be coupled with no end, without end. So allergies are really bad yesterday and today. So contextually, we take the without end and we join it with olam, and olam substantiates without end, and without end defines in this context forever. And once again, that means the Christian age has no end. There is no last day of the Christian age. And thus, when people want to jump up and they talk about the resurrection, you know, some former preterists, they say, the last day, the last day, the last day. Well, the last day of what? Pardon me. And they say, well, it has to be the last day of this age. No. The Christian age has no end. Therefore, the Christian age has no last day. Okay, do not forget, go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. There's a banner right at the very top. All you have to do is click on it to get the 2-book special regularly, almost $35 postpaid. The rest of February, and the month of March, $25 total price, postpaid to your door. All right? Did you do your homework? Not only read Isaiah chapter 9, 6-9, but Psalms 89, 34-37. Hope you'll do that, and I'll see you on the flip side.